PJ Thumb. So, today we were actually supposed to have Jose Raymond on, but unfortunately he had to cancel, and we're very sorry. But I want to assure all our viewers that we do have a schedule, we do have a plan. TOC has a plan. So for all our TOC viewers, we also have a plan for the TOC. We have a TOC Singapore. We have together, we TOC plan. We care at TOC together. Yeah. So instead of Jose Raymond, we have an old friend of mine, Ben Machak, who many of you will remember from TOC News Tonight at the last election 5 years ago. And if you watch the show with PJ Thumb, episode 1, he's also an extra in the background. See if you can spot him, you can only see his back, but he's there as well. So Ben and I go way back. And we're going to be talking about young voters, and especially people who are voting for the first time. And we're going to have a chat about what you should do and some of the things to think about if you're a young voter. So how are you doing today, Ben?
Great. I don't really think I'm a young voter anymore. It's actually my second time voting. So yeah, I think it's an interesting experience because I kind of noticed a generational gap. The previous election I was super hyped and I'm like, yeah, opposition's gonna get in kind of thing. And then I found out a lot of people from my generation, the first time voters at that time were like, of course I vote for PAP next time how to buy HDB flat if I don't vote for them. And I was like, okay, I totally misread my own generation.
Well, actually, it's a surprising thing, but when New Narrative did the Citizens' Agenda, this is our survey on what Singaporeans think are the most important issues facing Singapore, there was a very clear generational divide. I wouldn't say divide, it was a clear growth across, as you get older, the more you blame the PAP itself and how it conducts politics in Singapore as the cause of problems in Singapore. So overall, the entire cohort of survey respondents said the number one problem facing Singapore was a lack of transparency and accountability in the system. And number two was the PAP's destructive politics, right? And every single age group picked one of those two as the top issue, except for the youngest group, who only picked that as, I think, number 5, number 6. They put climate change, things like climate change as the biggest issue, right? Discrimination, those were their biggest issues. And that's a lot more immediate to them. So I think my theory is that maybe you don't get as exposed to how the PAP conducts politics, and especially to national politics, or rather your exposure to that across your whole life makes you realize how much they are responsible for the system as a whole. And so that makes you actually realize just how much they are responsible for all the problems that we have. And so you identify the PAP itself as the problem rather than all these other problems.
Yeah, I think that a lot of people are like, hey, you cannot just blame the PAP for all your problems, that kind of thing, right? But I'm like, actually, if you really look at it, right, there's a high chance it's probably because of them, because almost every aspect of how your life is controlled, has got something to do with the PAP, you know. And I don't know, I think maybe the PAP also would benefit from not having a one-party system, so then you can be like, hey, the other party did it, it wasn't us, kind of thing. I would say this though, I think that for the Gen Z and the millennials, the gap is that millennials were worried about buying houses, whereas Gen Z kind of know they can't buy houses, so. So I want to ask one of the questions we have here, right? So I think some people will say for PAP candidates, we don't really know about them, or you get a little bit of good reviews here and there. But there was one guy who just got overwhelmingly bad reviews from different sectors. His neighbors even snitched on him. Ivan Lim, right? How do you think this? I feel he was reverse campaigning for years.
Reverse campaigning.
How did this guy get through the filter, man?
Well, I think this is something we were talking about Connie Singham yesterday. The PAP looks for a certain kind of person. right? And Michael Barr has documented this very well. The number one determinant of elite status in Singapore is a pre-existing relationship with the Lee family. Now, I understand Ivan worked for Temasek, so there was some relationship there probably. He's a known quantity, right? And they feel that they know him and they can, well, they know him. Whether they can trust him is another thing, I don't know, but they know him. And then the other sort of factors which determine elite status, which is defined as, being an MP, cabinet member, perm-sec, whatever, things like being male, ethnic Chinese, English educated from one of a very small group of schools, and having military service, especially as an officer. So Ivan definitely met all those. Yeah, so, and also I think increasingly you have a party that, actually this is in its DNA since the big party splits of 61, 62, that this is a party which chooses people based on loyalty to the, to the cabinet, to the party leadership. I think in the past they had a greater pool of people to choose from in terms of talent, and now because they define talent so narrowly, and because I think increasingly they're defined, they need ideological loyalty. So I think those are the reasons why you end up missing out a lot of these red flags and warning signs, and instead end up picking a candidate who meets all your check boxes of, what is elite and are you loyal to the Lee family and to the PAP leadership, rather than are you going to be a good MP or a good person.
Actually, I want to ask you something about it. Like, what do you think is the, ideological checklist that you think they are looking for?
That's a very interesting question. I think, I mean, of course, the exact thing I have to always preface, right? This is speculation because I don't know exactly how the PAP leadership think, and indeed, there's a lot of how they think I don't even understand because my values are very different from theirs. But I think values is part of it. I think their values are very conservative. They're a deeply conservative party. They're a very elite, they're 1% party. They're maybe 0.1% at this point. And they are people who have all benefited from the system. So from their point of view, the system works. It works really well. And their desire, their overwhelming goal is to defend the system at all costs. And of course, that also works to their electoral legitimacy because that connects them directly with Lee Kuan Yew, who built this system. So they defend the system and they believe it's a good system, and so they only tweak at the margins, right? To them, change is tweaking at the margins. And their choice of the next prime minister is very emblematic of that, because instead of picking a visionary, you pick a manager. Someone who's a very good middle manager, who's very cautious, conservative, right? That's the kind, so he is an expression of the system. The same way, for example, the Republican Party in the US have spent years attacking the system, saying all politicians are dishonest, you can't trust the government, you can't trust people in power, you can't trust all the traditional sources of power. So eventually, who does the electorate pick? Someone who is the complete opposite of all of that, the anti-establishment, anti-rational, anti-science, anti-logic person of Donald Trump, right? So if you look at the PAP, who do they pick? They believe entirely in, let's just manage situation, move cautiously, go at the margins, don't rock the boat. And so their next leader is someone who epitomizes all those things.
On the point of don't rock the boat, right? So one of the questions that we have here is that, you grow up in Singapore, your parents will be like, hey, don't rock the boat, vote for PAP, that kind of thing. What do you do as, I guess, first-time voter or young voter when you're like, okay, should I not rock the boat? Am I being irresponsible if I vote if I don't vote for the PAP kind of thing? How do you find out more about and make an informed choice when it comes to voting?
Right. Well, I think one of the Workers' Party candidates actually had a very good quote about this, where she said, sure, don't rock the boat, but what about all the people who are already outside the boat drowning in the water? We need to save them, right? And sometimes, and this is me speaking now, those people have been thrown overboard so that the boat is not rocked, right? That is not the kind of country that I want to live in. So to young voters, what I'd say is think about what issues are important to you and then on that basis look for parties and candidates which represent those issues. And if you feel that none of them do that, then you can volunteer with parties to try and change their points of view, or you can try and get involved with activism, or you can, right now you can go query candidates as they go walkabout about those issues. So you have to remember that these politicians, candidates, they are trying to get elected to work for us, right? We are hiring them. This is their job interview. We are hiring them to run the country for the next 5 years. So we have a right to ask them questions and hold them to a high standard. And so if you were in charge of a company, for example, and you wanted to hire, you're chairman of the board and you want to hire a CEO, what are you going to do? What questions are you going to ask? What are the things that are important to how you want the company to
Especially
be
if they're
run?
the highest paid ones in the world, right?
Yeah, oh yeah, by far. Terry, do you have the image that the image that I shared with you? Can you put that up maybe on the back? And then we can talk a bit about how voters can make a decision about how how to choose.
I remember as a kid, we had like teachers who were talking about, like, don't rock the boat and all that. And I was like, but Lee Kuan Yew did nothing but rock the boat.
That's true.
And then they were like,
Yeah. I mean, he even rocked his own boat, right, with all the changes in the 80s. Okay, so behind us, right, what you're going to see is a 2x2 grid. And this is actually what a colleague of mine suggested that people should think, one way to get a start on how to think about the important issues that work for, that are important to you, basically, right? And so what you'll see is across the top, you'll see local issues, national issues, and then along one side, you'll see past and future, right? Past being things like accountability, track record, how a party has done in the past, how a candidate has done in the past, and future being things like vision or manifesto. What is the party or candidate's vision for the future? What are they promising? And so you look at this and you decide, right, what is the most important to you? Is it, for example, local issues and how a party or candidate has performed on those local issues in the past? Or might it be, say, national issues and what a party is going to do for the country, for the state, for the nation as a whole in the future, and what their vision is for the future, right? So this is a very basic framework that helps you start thinking and helps you start prioritizing about what's important. And of course, when I say local, one way someone asked me what is local, well, maybe it'd be constituency, because the way Singapore politics, Singapore's electoral system is set up, right, MPs are inherently conflicted because on the one hand, you're supposed to be a town councillor and look after very basic issues, and then on the other hand, you're supposed to be a national legislator. So they're very conflicted between these roles, but for you as a voter, right, especially if you've never gone through this process before, you can look at this 2x2 chart and start thinking about what exactly is your priority. And of course, if the party that then meets your priorities is not running in your constituency, you can go volunteer with them in other constituencies, go help out, right? Go donate, go support, amplify their message, read their manifesto, volunteer with them. And I think remember that this is a long process, right? Who we vote for today is one thing, but this is just the start of of a 5-year parliament, and we have to then hold people accountable for what they promise in this 9 days for the next 5 years.
yeah. Actually, like on the point of accountability, right? So one of my questions here, if I were to summarize it, is basically talking about how the younger generation is very concerned with things like gender equality, LGBTQ rights, mental health awareness,
Yeah.
like equality when it comes to things like race and sexism and stuff like that, right? And when you talked about accountability, it's sort of like, how do you actually keep anything accountable if you have a one-party like government kind of thing? Like is it even possible to have accountability in?
Yeah, I mean, it's very hard. If you look at what the PAP has done, the kind of promises they've made, and especially I think the fact that we don't have a free media, right, an independent media. The media is government controlled, and they have openly admitted that they do propaganda, that they are heavily biased in favor of the government. So with a fundamentally one-party system, and not just a party, but one that controls information, it's very hard to hold people accountable because the system itself has no accountability built in, there's no transparency built in, right? To this day, we don't know how much money a lot of people make. And when people screw up, they are not fired, they don't face the consequences. And that culture of impunity actually ripples down through the system, I think. It's very destructive. So it's all those things. With social media, we do have a bit of a way of fighting back, right? And I think that what we've tried to do, for example, some of the videos that I've made, and definitely videos that other people have made, and Facebook posts that other people have made, is about holding people accountable and showing the kind of hypocrisy that goes on.
Yeah.
But yeah, ultimately there's no substitute for things like an independent media and genuine constitutional checks and balances. And that's all the things that, that's one reason why we need at least 1/3 of the seats to be held by the opposition to block these willy-nilly constitutional changes.
And also, I guess on that count of accountability, I just want to share this story, right? That something that happened. So Roy and a few other people got in trouble during the previous election because they said something on cooling off day, right? But a certain pro-PAP page that got taken down recently.
You can say fabrications about the PAP.
Fabrications about the PAP, right?
FAP, they got taken down.
I think the guy behind that page personally doesn't like me because I was involved in making a video of the police, making the police report that he also said things and then his house got because it's sort of like, hey, wait a minute, you did this to the opposition. What about your pro page? And they're like, we have to. I wonder how nice the cops were when they raided his house. Really okay, flip your mattress,
I don't. Yes, to clarify, they didn't raid his house. He just got a warning. Whereas Teo So Lang and others who posted on cooling off day got Teo So Lang got her home raided and a lot of her property confiscated and I think returned damaged. So it was very unfair. There was definitely a lot of hypocrisy and a double standard going on, which I pointed out in the show PJ Thumb, episodes 4 and 5.
Yeah. So okay, next question I'll ask you is that, so yeah, it's kind of funny how the way the PAP got into power was through peaceful protests and actually being able to stand up and have freedom of speech. But what is the role of peaceful protests in the future now? Because we pretty much can't do it. You could hold a cardboard sign with a smiley face.
For 3 seconds and you're breaking the law, right? It's insane in Singapore. And this is the problem with the Public Order Act. It effectively makes going out in public illegal, right? Because under the Public Order Act, if one person in public for a political purpose, what on earth is, political is so broadly defined. So effectively, anyone can be prosecuted. Whether they do prosecute you, of course, is up to the discretion of the AG, of the police to come after you. The thing though is that, so first of all, protest is an entirely legitimate way of expressing your political opinion, especially peaceful protests. Let's not forget though, the PAP also organized and supported violent protest, right? Because their position was that this is a colonial government, this is an illegitimate government. So we have photos of Lee Kuan Yew taking part in protests when he was in opposition, and definitely he was present when there were violent protests going on, although whether he actually organized or endorsed those is a different issue. But the PAP itself was very much participating in a lot of protests when it was in opposition, right? And actually, they even supported some of these things even after they came into government, but before we became independent, because they still wanted to be a party of the people. So they helped organize big strikes against European-owned companies, for example, even after they became, into government. So protests is legitimate. And why does protest happen? Because the proper, not proper, but the official channels, right,
Just
don't
aren't
work.
working, yeah.
Yeah. And when people feel frustrated, they turn to protest in order to express themselves. And not having that outlet is dangerous, because then all this anger gets bottled up, and it ends up coming out in very destructive.
sorry.
But this is the thing, right? A protest, people don't wake up in the morning and go, "Oh, I'm going to protest today. Oh, I'm going to,"
Kind of takes
spontaneously.
years to build up and
Yeah, it takes years to build up. People don't just wake up and go, "I'm going to riot." And likewise, how the PAP tends to frame these things is to say like, "Oh, there's a mastermind trying to organize, ways to subvert the nation." Heck, they've accused me of somehow like, being a traitor and wanting to organize, subvert the nation. Like, why? What? Why would I do that, first of all? But second of all, like, I can barely run my own company. You think somehow I can organize this vast conspiracy of protesters to get up spontaneously and riot or something like that, right? No, these things are very much, they are the product of years and years of pent-up anger, expressing themselves in terms of people then trying to organize to create change and being frustrated. And that's the sort of pathway, the general pathway you walk down that ends up leading to protests and potentially riots. So as a government, if you don't want protests, then make your own channels of feedback and your own ability to create change more effective, right? Make it so that people can change the system peacefully. Make it so that they can elect people who actually represent them. Make it so that your civil servants and your grassroots leaders actually listen. Make it so that the feedback channels actually work and reach all the way to the top. Make it so that people are held accountable, right? That's how you actually prevent protest. By the time a protest happens, all of those things will have failed. See, and that's why we see these protests at Hong Lim Park for all these different issues, because that means that proper, well, again, not proper, but official channels have all failed. So, yeah.
I want to ask you, like, okay, what are your thoughts on the general voting mindset of Singaporeans? Because for me, I feel that it's like, I'm not happy about like, vote PAP also cannot do anything. Yeah, in your opinion, what do you think is the general mindset of voters?
Okay, so I think the important thing is to keep in mind that democracy is more than voting, right? Self-determination is a lot more than voting. Elections, as we see in Singapore, can be heavily rigged in many, many ways. And in Singapore, the government has been very, very good. The PAP has been very good at changing how elections are run, to rig things so that even our vote is not free or fair. But real change comes from organizing people to take collective action. And that's, I think, what Singaporeans need to realize. If you want change, the vote is only one option. Organizing yourself, getting involved in politics, in issues, all the way from very small local ones to very big national ones, that is also necessary, right? Helping to support a free and fair media, right? Support Terry, guys. Please support the online citizen. Which camera am I looking at? Support Terry, please, because you need a free and fair media if you want good government. You cannot have good government without independent media. It's impossible. And in fact, the converse is true, that if you don't have independent media, you probably almost certainly have bad government. So it's all these things. You need to volunteer, you need to step up, you need to speak out, you need to get involved, and you need to organize yourself for change, and you need to do it every day, right? Democracy is a big responsibility. Being a citizen is a big responsibility, and we all have to keep working for it every day. A vote once in every 5 years is not going to change anything. Taking an effort to make the world better every day, that will change things. And slowly over time. It takes a lot of time.
So on the point of trying to make the world better every day, right? It kind of feels, okay, like as a youngish person, it kind of feels that the older generation seem to be complaining every day about like, hey, government do this, I don't like, I'm not happy, but then like, still vote for the PAP. So, what are your thoughts on...
Okay, before I answer that, why don't we, those of you who are commenting, right, you can start leaving some questions, and then we'll try and answer those questions as soon as we can. Okay, so to answer your question, you have to remember that the elections are very unfree and unfair, first of all. The PAP's obsession with percentage is very misleading because one of the ways that they restrict and make elections unfree is by restricting voter choice. And they have done that over the years. In the earlier decades, they would simply arrest someone and lock them up so they can't run. Or
like for 32 years, right?
Yes. Or it doesn't even have to be 32 years because you have to nominate yourself in person, right? Oh. So all they do is arrest you the day before nomination day or the morning of nomination day. Then you cannot go nominate yourself. Then you cannot run, right? So you only need 1 day and not even a formal arrest. Just, oh, police needs you to come in for questioning. For 2 hours, right? And then nomination over. So they did that a lot in the past. Then in the 70s, 80s, there was the lawsuit. And don't forget, if you're bankrupt, you cannot run. So that's how they got rid of JBJ.
Oh, and I think Dr. Chi also, right?
Dr. Chi, yes, Dr. Chi. I think this is only Dr. Chi's 6th election, even though he's been around 30 years, you know, because he was bankrupt.
Like penalty bin, right?
Yeah. There is so much fear, right? And I think that's changing. And I think clearly in this election, the last election, there are very good people running for other parties. But for the past 30 years, 40 years, 50 years, you don't see very good options. And so when you walk into the polling booth and you look at the ballot, you actually only have 2 choices. You can't pick none of the above, right? Or 3 choices maybe. It's either PAP or not PAP. And there's no reopen nominations or none of the above or I don't like anyone. That you can spoil your ballot, but then that means the ballot isn't counted and it's just, you know.
How you spoil your I mean, don't spoil your vote, please.
Yes, don't spoil your vote.
Don't. But I heard how you spoil it also could be, oh, your pen touch, you know, the PAP box, so it's a vote for that. Like, spoiling your ballot is not.
Yeah, anecdotally, I think Alex Au wrote a blog post some years ago, I think it was 2 elections ago, where he was a counting agent. And if I remember correctly, you can go see Yawning Bread. What he observed was that someone on the ballot paper next to the PAP box had written, in pardon my language, "fuck you PAP," next to the PAP box. Now, under the rules, you indicate your choice of party by putting something in the box next to that party. So the PAP counting agent argued that putting "fuck you PAP" next to the PAP is a vote for the PAP because it was in that box. You see, now I don't remember what the assistant returning officer then said, right? But imagine if there had been no counting agent for that other party there to then protest and say, no, wait a moment, clearly the voter intention is against the PAP. Then the PAP's counting agent's opinion would have held a lot more sway. So it's really important that you volunteer as counting agents, polling agents and counting agents, so that these sort of arguments, stupid arguments, don't get, don't hold sway. But yeah, so it is technically possible. It really depends on how the counting official determines your intent. And sometimes if you put something in the box next to PAP, even if you intend it to be opposing the PAP, because it's in the box next to PAP, it can be counted for a vote for the PAP. We did a video for this 5 years ago, remember?
Yeah.
You must put something in the box next to the party you want to vote for. Put an X in the box next to the party you want to vote for. That's what you do.
Yeah, please don't write fuck the PAP. Yeah. It might be counted as a vote.
But to answer your question, right, you can't blame people also for voting PAP. First of all, there's not a lot of choice in front of them because the PAP has been very good at constraining choice. So between the PAP and maybe someone who is not going to be a very good MP, you say, well, lesser of the 2 evils, right? Voting comes down to a choice between 2 or 3 people. It's not a choice between all the parties or all the values or all the ideals. When you go in the ballot box, you're very much focused on just these 2 choices. So it's really important for you as a voter to try and make those choices as good as possible before the election campaign even starts. And that's why I talk about democracy, citizenship being every day, right? We have to hold these parties to high standards so that the choice that we ultimately come down to is as good as possible. If you don't do anything for 5 years, you walk into the booth and it's just 2 idiots looking at you from the ballot, well, you know, part of that is your responsibility as a citizen, not having demanded more of the parties or supported one of the parties or volunteered or donated or held them accountable over the past 5 years.
Or like get your face as the third idiot.
Or run, yeah. And of course, the other thing I always point out is that the PAP has never been shy about threatening voters, right? Upgrading is one mechanism, right? Town council funds. And if you ask the people at Aljunied Hougang Town Council, I think they would say they have definitely suffered from being an opposition ward.
Yeah, it's so on that like point with like Aljunied, right? It was crazy seeing the like 8 page spreads of like, oh, did Aljunied do something wrong or something like that. When you straight up had a guy from Ang Mo Kio Town Council that used like Town Council money to go like meet KTV girls. Like,
I didn't know that.
Oh, it was like all over the news apparently.
Oh dear.
I mean, not enough lah, you know, but.
Oh wait, that's the guy who was arrested for corruption.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, yeah, I remember. Yes, so we definitely have had more than one case of corruption in the town councils, in the PAP town councils over the years. Yeah.
So I don't know why, like when it comes to news, those are the things I remember.
Let's, Terry, are there any questions that you want to highlight?
We couldn't see the comments actually because
it's a bit hard to see, but
I think you need to scroll
if you scroll down a bit, and if you just help us highlight some questions, you can let us know. Okay. Was there anything else you wanted to ask there?
There's probably just one I would do just before we close up. Yeah, just the advice.
Okay. So let's take some questions. Okay.
Yeah, guys,
so
give us some questions
about the party whip. And yes, that is. Oh, there's a problem with the audio. Party whip. No.
Just not.
Oh, that's fixed. Okay. So that's the other thing, right? People will say something like, there are very good people in the PAP and you should vote for them. And sure, there are very good people in the PAP. The problem is, of course, that the PAP has an extremely strong party whip, and so they walk into parliament and they don't have any choice about how they vote. And that whip has been defied very, very few times. I think, if I remember correctly, Inderjit Singh once defied it to abstain rather than vote yes, which was incredibly brave. But he couldn't even vote no, he just abstained, right? So it's one thing to say, oh, this PAP candidate is a good person. And I know some of them, they are good people, but they don't really have a choice of how they vote in parliament because the party whip is strong, right? The whip is there to enforce voting, to enforce party discipline, and then if you don't behave, you're going to get in a lot of trouble. I mean, can you imagine being a PAP MP and defying the party, the sheer amount of trouble the revenge they will take on you.
You're just not going to get invited for Christmas anymore. No, I mean, it's probably much worse than that, right?
It's going to be a lot worse. Yes.
Dr. Tam, what's your opinion on whether opposition parties should accept NCMP considered as it is considered as a double-edged sword?
NCMP, okay.
They can't vote, right?
In the next parliament they can. Okay, so for those of you who are watching, the question was, Dr. Tham, what's your opinion on whether the opposition party should accept non-constituency MPs? Now, in the current parliament up to this point in time, okay, so for those of you who don't know, NCMPs are up to 12, it guarantees a minimum of 12 opposition MPs in parliament by making up the rest of that quota with the opposition, the non-winning party candidates who scored the best in their contests, right? So in the previous parliament, we saw Leon Pereira, for example, Gerald Giam, And in the next parliament, there will be a minimum of 12. So if, say, the non-PAP parties win 6, they will then appoint another 6 from the best performing non-winning candidates. Now, in previous years, I was against this scheme because the idea is, as we saw Indrani Raja say, the idea is so that the PAP can say, hey, you can vote PAP and we'll still guarantee 12 opposition MPs. And I was against it because those opposition MPs did not have full voting rights. However, in the next parliament, they will have full voting rights and be the equivalent of all the MPs. I'm not completely sure whether they'll be treated totally equally. They should be treated totally equally, like get the same allowance and all that. They should be totally equal to all the other MPs. In which case, I would accept it as a move towards proportional representation. Because in Singapore, what we have is a very unrepresentative system where the PAP will win between 60-70% of the vote, but they will have at least 93-95% of the seats. That is not representative. What about the 30-40% of Singapore who voted against the PAP? They should be represented too. And so having MPs represent them is, I think, a move towards proportional representation. And I think that is reasonable as long as those MPs are treated equally. Now, of course, the PAP is still using that line that, these are, you get them for free, vote PAP, you still get them for free, which is, of course, nonsense. Vote for the person you think will represent you the best. Vote for the things which are important. Don't vote for something on the basis of a cheap scheme. And anyway, I think as Peng Eng Huat has pointed out, if you vote out all the PAP MPs, you still get them as grassroots advisors. And I think you also mentioned, right, they still can become,
they
on stat boards.
Go on stat boards, government-linked companies, be generals, it's 2 for 1 if you don't vote for them actually.
Yeah, actually they'll all still be there. And they'll find their way onto directorships and, they'll still be involved. So, whereas the opposition, they will just, have to go back to their day jobs. And
if they still have them.
Yeah, they still have them. Yeah, like Li Lian at the last election, she lost. She had to go find a job, right? She couldn't take up the NCMP. She couldn't afford it. So if you want a good person in Parliament, vote for that person. Don't think about, again, all these trying to game the system or whatever, tactical vote. Just vote for the best person that you want in Parliament. Vote for the people. Do your homework. Exercise your vote responsibly.
Do we have any more questions?
So the question is, why don't we vote Chan Chun Sing in Indrani out and then invite them back as NCMP?
Yeah, why? Why not?
Why don't we vote Chan Chun Sing and Indrani out and invite them as NCMP? Because the NCMPs will be drawn from the party which doesn't win. So if the PAP wins the overall election, then the NCMPs will be drawn from the other parties, not the PAP. It's not the best losers full stop, it's the best losers from the non-winning party. So the only way to get PAP MPs as NCMPs is to make the PAP lose the entire election.
Yeah, which is very unlikely.
Any other questions?
If there's no other questions, I'll just ask you the last one. What would be your advice to the first-time voters, who are young, passionate about a lot of these, Gen Z type topics, and how would you advise them to go about voting for the first time?
Well, several things, right? One is don't accept the PAP framing of us as passive citizens who only get to be citizens once every 5 years for 9 days and then just vote and that's it. This sort of passive politics is what they want to disempower you and make you feel helpless and make you lose hope. So understand that politics, especially in a tiny country like Singapore, is something that needs to be done every day, all the time. And young voters, young Singaporeans are really showing how activism can be done, and they've been very successful at it, right? And there have been some real achievements by young activists in the past few years trying to create change. So I think if you're a young voter, understand that this is only, in some ways, this is the last step of a long process of the past 5 years, and it's also the first step of a long process for the next 5 years. And don't see your vote as just being a vote. See it as the culmination of your activism of the last 5 years, trying to shift the ground and change the debate and increase awareness and understanding of important issues, and see it as the first step, right, by demanding that candidates speak about issues, answer questions on issues, and then holding them accountable and continuing to campaign for change in the next 5 years. See it as the first step towards the next 5 years and bringing the kind of issues you want to bring to the attention of the legislature. So it's not a vote in and of itself. It's a step in a continuous long process, and you have to continue to be politically active.
Can you explain in simple terms what an SMC is and why many of them are like small islands crowded among enormous GRCs?
Can I explain in simple terms what an SMC is and why they are tiny islands crowded by huge GRCs? Okay. Until the 1980s, all of Singapore's constituencies were single-member constituencies because the principle is you vote for one person to represent you in Parliament. Very simple, very direct. That person is your member of Parliament, your elected representative. From the late 70s, the PAP began screwing up big time, and Singaporeans were very unhappy and started electing opposition MPs for the first time since 1968. With JBJ in 81, Cham Sitong in 84, and then two more, Ling Hao Dung and who's the other one, in 1991, right? And the PAP freaked out and changed the whole electoral system to make it a lot harder for for Singaporeans to elect non-PAP MPs. And one of the changes they made was the GRC system, where you take
all or nothing.
Yes, you group together a group of MPs from 3 to 6, it was back then, into a mega constituency, and you vote for all 3, 4, 5 or 6 of them in a slate. And the
6, that sounds very small. I mean, by today's standards, it's...
Yeah. But initially the GRCs were smaller, but then they grew and grew, over successive elections. The idea is to raise barriers for the opposition politicians, right?
It's a risky move for you to field like 6 good candidates kind of thing, as compared to the PAP where you can do...
They just feel this one big anchor minister and then 5 people, right? It's a joke
so
we all say about Jurong.
Ivans.
Who are the other people who running with Taman? Nobody cares. He could run with those dress shop mannequins. He could run with 4 dress shop mannequins. We still vote Taman in. You know
it's
it.
Like you could totally pull off the Itman like 我要打10个 like.
So the other thing to answer the question is gerrymandering, where because the PAP has an idea, the government, right, don't forget it's the Prime Minister who sets the boundaries. He merely directs the Electoral Boundaries Review Committee to draw them. But he is the person under the law who is responsible for setting those boundaries as the minister in charge. So because they know on a polling station by polling station, polling district basis, how you vote, they can gerrymander and draw the boundaries to ensure that the GRCs and SMCs all are more likely to elect PAP MPs, right? So you draw the boundaries to ensure that non-PAP voters are submerged by the PAP voters, and that's why you have crazy boundaries like Holland Village is in Tanjong Pagar, Serangoon is in Marine Parade. I mean, Tanjong Pagar and Marine Parade are like, seaside, coastal constituencies, and they go all the way to Serangoon, they go all the way to Holland. How can
I always tell
Holland
people like
Tanjung
the
Pagar,
easiest
right?
way to explain gerrymandering is how do you get 70% of people voting for PAP but then 90% of PAP in parliament?
93%, 95%, you know, it's crazy. And that's why you see these big mega GRCs and then like a small bit carved out for Bukit Panjang, Bukit Batok, Pioneer, Hougang, Potong Pasir, because the idea is to maximize the PAP vote, right? And that's how the boundaries are drawn, because there's no transparency about how boundaries are drawn. Until the 80s, boundary changes were debated in Parliament, and then that law was changed as well. So the Prime Minister, through the mechanism of the EBRC, just simply declares the new boundaries. And fundamentally, it's about maximizing the PAP's vote, and there's no real logic to how many of these boundaries are drawn. So that's the sad answer to your question. It's really about maximizing outcomes for the PAP.
Many who feel that they want an opposition voice, but feel that the candidates in their constituency are not good enough to be voted in. What would you say to them?
So many people feel that they want an opposition voice, but the candidates in their constituency are not good enough to be voted in, right? What would I say? And yes, first of all, remember that this is a situation deliberately created by the PAP through decades of fear, harassment, intimidation, right? Lawsuits, arrests, the smearing of opposition candidates. People look at what Chee Soon-Juan has been put through and they ask themselves, do I want to be put through that? So there is a lot of fear, right? Now that is changing. We've got incredible opposition candidates, and that is slowly changing. But people, I think there isn't the kind of choice that we had in the 50s and 60s, where you had, 6 people running in a constituency. You had a lot more parties and diversity of parties, so people from different backgrounds. So if you are in a constituency and you're unhappy with the choice you face, but you want more opposition in Parliament, go somewhere where there is someone you respect and go help them. Go volunteer for that party, go volunteer for that candidate, offer your help, offer, if nothing else, donate a bit of money. Every bit counts. And remember that a vote is only one tiny part of being a citizen and being part of a democracy, right?
Actually, like on the, just want to say, like on the point of like being a democracy, right? And like maybe this is a like radical view that's not like very PC, but I kind of feel that in Singapore, you don't even have a fair shot at democracy, right? That it might be better to just vote for the non-PAP candidate so that in the future, or like you might have a fair chance. Because when I feel that it's not fair to look at like, okay, does the PAP candidate has the better things that I stand for, or this other, because there's the party whip on the PAP candidate side. There's no accountability if you are voting for the PAP side. There's nothing to really stop that one party system. So I kind of feel like, and I know that people probably disagree with this, but I kind of feel that for me, I'm probably just going to vote for opposition even if I don't like them. And it might sound irresponsible, but I think it's a responsible choice long term kind of thing. It's just my opinion as a young person. Like.
No, that is a valid point of view. And definitely it is a valid thing. And it comes back to what you prioritize, right? If you prioritize national issues in the long term, right, in the future, then you're making a vote not for a specific candidate, but for a better Singapore, a better structure, process, better democracy in the future. And that is entirely valid, and I would agree with you, that is probably how I'm going to vote too, right? Thinking about the long-term good of Singapore and what we need, the kind of voices we need in Parliament, and the kind of message that we want to send to the government about their performance, things like that. On the other hand, it is also valid for someone to say, well, actually, I am most concerned about local issues, and I just want someone who is a good person who will represent me and take care of me locally. And they want someone good and talented locally who will do that for them. And you do see people running on that sort of strategy. I think, for example, the Jose Raymond, who was again supposed to be here in Potong Pasir, and his strategy is very much a local grassroots effort. I will take care of you. He's not really running on a national platform, the way that the Workers' Party, SDP, and PSP are about the future and about this broader issue of opposition and holding the government accountable nationally. He seems to be running more as, I am here for you locally, Potong Pasir. I'm a municipal councillor. I am your guy. I am, a son of Potong Pasir. Well, I think that phrase
I would say that with Jose Ramos specifically, he has actually brought up things on a national level. Sometimes he's a little bit more skewed towards sports and it's things that actually you can really unite and try to rally people together. And I've helped him take pictures and do videos here and there, and I think the residents over there really they would invite him to their house, their kids' birthday parties and all that. I don't know, I've never seen a PAP candidate able to pull that off. Yeah. I almost moved the Potong Pasir just to be able to vote for him.
That's your answer to that question then. Your other choice, before the next election, move to a constituency.
You have 4 years to guess how they're going to cut the map.
How they're going to do the boundaries.
Move there.
Yeah. So to answer that, I think we answered that question. I think just there's all sorts of considerations and it's all valid. But
Is there anything else or?
I think this one is the last question. This viewer is asking for a balanced view. So what are some of the good points and bad points of this ruling party, not the previous ruling party? And likewise for opposition.
What's the good points and bad points for the PAP and for the
PAP, for the PAP and likewise for opposition. I think we don't need to answer the opposition. We just say, is there any good points and bad? Can you say the good points and bad points for PAP?
The good points and bad points about the PAP, and also, the person also asked about the opposition. I don't know how much time we have.
No.
This could be a long.
54 minutes.
Okay.
good points of the PAP?
Good points on the PAP. Now we're going to sit in silence for 5 minutes more. No, okay, so here is what I really respect about the PAP, right? They do listen and are very sensitive to the ground, and they do have in many ways, they do have a very good idea of what people want and need. Whether they then take action on that is a different issue. And when they do take action, whether they choose to listen or suppress is a different issue. But the PAP have, I think, never lost sight of the fact that what people are saying on the ground is really important, and they are very good at surveying and trying to find out and listening, and they are very sensitive to the needs of people, to what people are saying. And if you look at 2011 and the kind of swerve that happened, and Tharman being put in charge just after losing one GRC, right, and Tharman being empowered, shows you that the PAP is not this blind authoritarian party that just sits up there, but that they do listen, they do care, they do desperately want to win elections. But it also shows you that, you know, what is needed to make them change, right? Because if you look then at 2015 and the things that have happened after that, the sidelining of Tharman and the kind of policies we've seen in the past few years, right, and the almost tone-deaf actions of certain ministers, ignoring big issues, they do respond to elections, and they do respond to results, and they do respond to what people are saying. And of course, sometimes they do respond by suppressing it, silencing it, you know, but they're not unaware of it per se. So I do respect that very much about the PAP. They are not, you know, just these like Olympian gods sitting up high up in the clouds and ignoring us on the ground. They do listen. They don't always act, and sometimes they act in the opposite way that we want, but they do listen. So that's that. Yeah, that's one good point.
I guess for me, if I I don't know, okay, like maybe this might be more relevant to like the younger people, but like I kind of like that the PAP actually for some reason passed a bill. I think it was 1992. I don't remember, that allowed trans people to change the sex on their like identification card and get married and all that.
Yeah.
And like, if I'm not mistaken, it was like 1992. Like I think
Around
I was
there, yeah.
I wasn't even born. I was like -1 years old kind of thing, you know.
Right.
And I'm like, that's great. But what happened for the 27 years afterwards? Why was there no progress in any of these things? You know. Any other good things I could say about PAP? I guess I'm mildly proud about being in the only economic dictatorship in the world. It's like Singapore is the crazy love child of North Korea and Trump's America, and that's why they chose to come here. Yeah. Like, it fills me with this sense of pride that on the Trump and Kim Jong-un spectrum, we are in the middle. I mean, it's something, right?
Yeah. That's a very interesting observation, in that we are this ultra neoliberal paradise that is also incredibly controlling socially, right? And so somehow we ended up, so you've actually in some ways put your finger on our unique position in the world. Yeah. Are there other good points about the PAP? Your first point is actually interesting, because the PAP have never been shy about pursuing radical policies where they believe in them, and that includes, they've redefined marriage several times, right? As I was talking to Connie yesterday, because marriage before the Women's Charter was 1 man and 4 women, and women were treated like property, and the PAP were very radical. They said no, marriage is 2 people. And 1 man and 1 woman, right? And they permitted gender affirmation surgery, changing your gender on your identity card. Although then, of course, there was a case in '96 where I think it was a man who changed his gender, reaffirmed his gender, was woman, then got married to a man without telling him. And so I think it was '96, the government redefined marriage again to be specifically 1 man and 1 woman, and there was, I think it was it has to be based on at birth or whatever. No, I don't think it has to be based at birth, but you have to be 1 man and 1 woman.
Because I know recently there was a case where they got married and then someone was in the process of transitioning, and then after that, it became a lesbian marriage, and then after that they were like, instead of annulling the marriage, just struck it off the
they just cancelled it, like it never existed, which was very strange. And
that's why cancel culture is wrong. No,
But what I think was more shameful was then these people were kind of doxxed because their personal information was released by the ministry, and that is just morally abhorrent. Right, so
doxing is okay if you're part of the ministry.
We've seen definitely a few instances where people have spoken to the press being unhappy about their welfare and talking about their needs, and the ministry responded by doxing them and saying, oh no, this person actually gets so much welfare, and and then the family then, whether or not they, because it's relative, right? Just because you get this amount of welfare, maybe you can't survive on it still because you've got special needs, your children, extended family, but they then had to really pull back and apologize. So this is very unfortunate unfortunate is putting it mildly, for a ministry to dox people by revealing personal information. That's just horrible. But of course, privacy laws don't apply to the government. The PDPA specifically does not apply to the government, so they can do whatever the heck they want.
Actually, I want to ask you, why do you... Okay, this might not be super related.
We're supposed to be talking about good points of the PAP.
Oh,
though.
Yeah.
We can come back to your question, but I think I also want to say they do pick smart people.
Like Ivan, right?
I mean, he's not a complete idiot. They do find and have been historically very good at co-opting talented people, right?
Like Taman.
And like Taman.
You're against us, join us.
Like Louis Ng, and then there's a new candidate also in Nee-Soon, Carrie Tan. She's she works in the charity NGO field, right? Doesn't she? social enterprises, right? She seems pretty, so far, so good, you know. Of course, you remember Nee Soon is helmed by a certain minister, he who shall not be mentioned. So, you know, good and bad, but they are able to co-opt certain people, you know, and good people. Whether those people are then again able to create change. Has Lewis been able to create change, right? Will Carey Tan be able to create change? Has Tharman been able to create genuine change? Only after the panic of 2011, then he got sidelined. So that's a good and a bad. They find good people, but they don't actually let them do genuinely good change to the system, but rather just tweak here, tweak. Halima, for example, everyone loves Halima, but then look at what they did to her. She will be forever remembered with this stain upon her legacy. It is, you know, so yeah, that's a good point and a bad point. If PAP find good people, but they don't necessarily do good things with them. What else good can we say about the PAP?
I mean, Shanmugam got a A-grade scorecard when it came to LGBT issues.
But you see, that's another thing, right? The PAP of the scorecard, Shanmugam's getting that good grade was based on his rhetoric. But
as law minister, he could legalize gay marriage overnight.
Absolutely. He's law and home affairs. He could just boom, just enact all these laws,
that's what
legalize.
I miss about the PAP. They just go like, you know, like where's the iron of like we need 2 casinos no matter what you guys say, right? You know, where's the same iron to like gay marriage overnight? You know, like
yeah. Back when they did that in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. Where is it today, right? If Mr. Shanmugam and other ministers believe that LGBTQIA plus communities need to be protected, they should just do it overnight, as you say, change the law. It's
think
very
about
simple.
like this part I hate. I feel like we've lost our economic dictatorship ways, right? Because think about the bottom line. If gay people can get married, more HDBs get bought.
Yeah, I get it. That could be. I'm not sure what's stopping them. Even though rhetorically they will support the rights of gay people, they will not back it up with action. So again, good and bad, I suppose. Rhetorically, they will say the right things. They always know how to say the right things. Whether they do the right things, again, you know, and they're still willing to, like the elected presidency, right? Chan Chun Sing said, we will do this because the right thing, we will pay the electoral price, whatever. Okay, well, you know, they can still do that. That one is clearly in their interest, but there's still, I guess, some semblance of courage there. The amount of capital they expended on POFMA, even though, you know, they've clearly lost control of the narrative that people understand it's a law designed for censorship, right, to encourage fear.
No, it just so happens that the people who've gotten charged by it are, like, you know, activists. It's just a
like
coincidence,
about 40% of the, It's basically, I think there's like 3 categories, right? One is COVID-19. One is, what's his name? States Times Review, Alex Tan, right?
Oh, yeah.
He's like 1/3 or 40% by himself. And then there's government critics and activists. And they explicitly said, we're not going to use this law against critics, we're not going to criminalize dissent. But what do? Use it against critics, right? So, and then there's all these, as the Class Notes website noted, there's all these falsehoods that they didn't use POFMA on. You know,
so they're true.
what is the point of, but they want to do it, they're still out there, they're still defending it, so it's, when they want to do it, they can still get these things done. I would say, I guess that's a good point. When they want to do something, they act and they will do what they want to do, what they believe is right, or what is in their interest.
It's basically you can do what you want, just don't get caught. And if they choose to catch you, they have the power. Kind of.
Yeah, I guess.
Yeah. No.
Yeah.
Do we have any more questions?
I hope that answered the question. I mean, there are some good things about the PAP, but
they're not all bad. We have Running Water, which is like the strongest argument of why you should vote for them. Like,
Singapore is on a sort of management level. Singapore is well managed. It's the vision and the values which I fundamentally disagree with, but I think on a day-to-day management level, we're very well managed. But of course, that's the civil service. That's not the PAP. Right? We mustn't conflate the two. Even the PAP disappears, the civil service. Okay,
We
let's
didn't learn this in school.
There's a guy asking you to stop coughing and clearing your throat.
Oh shit! Sorry, I smoke a lot. I need to quit.
You know, that's another thing, right? Vaping. Why doesn't it doesn't make any sense to me? Vaping helps people quit, right? Why doesn't the government allow?
Oh, there was a
vaping?
Crime Watch episode on it. The vapes explode and kill people.
Okay, I mean, there's so much scaremongering about these things. Whatever. Anyway, let's. Yeah. What was the last question?
There's no one question.
We're done.
So we're going to do the parliamentary reruns.
Okay.
So the first one we'll be doing is a GST test balloon.
Oh, okay. Okay. So we're gonna rerun some of the greatest hits of the previous parliament now, and the first one will be the GST trial balloon. So do enjoy. We'll be back at 9 o'clock. Yeah. So we'll be back at 9 o'clock after the sudden surprise debates tonight to give you our instant reaction. And have a nice discussion about those. So we'll see you back at around 9 o'clock. But in the meantime, enjoy the reruns. Thank you very much. And also thank you very much to Ben for joining us here today. And yeah, good luck everyone. Take care. See you soon.
The question is that Parliament approves the financial policy of the government for the financial year 1st April 2018. Yes, Mr. William?
Yes, sir.
Oh, sorry.
Clarification for
Clarification.
Finance Minister. Sorry, couldn't find you. Yeah, I have 4 clarifications for Finance Minister. But before that, I'd like to thank him for touching briefly on the longitudinal studies. I'll be taking this matter up further with MOE at the COS. Now, the Finance Minister, first clarification, he referred to Mr. Lau's speech yesterday. I'm sorry, Mr. Lau is rushing to Parliament right now after attending to some family matters. And he mentioned that somehow the Workers' Party was not being upfront because we didn't want the government to distract this debate by announcing the GST. Now, if I heard him correctly, actually his speech was focused on supporting the government's accurate identification of the challenges going forward with becoming a global Asian node and so on. And he did actually specifically say that it's fine for the government to announce the GST hike or intended hike in advance of time, and we can actually have a separate debate about it. And his main point was that by doing it in this budget, it distracts the debate from the other things that are being done in the budget because everybody's focusing on this thing, which isn't even a budget measure. So that is the first thing. And of course, there was a bit of cut and thrust about whether we should debate it at the election rally. And we do welcome the early announcement because we think the voters should also make a decision on this. Second clarification is about the party position on the announcement of the GST, and I think Pritam Singh may also elaborate on this further, about why it was said by him that we cannot support the announcement at this point in time. Now, the government itself is not definitive about when this is going to happen. It may be 7 years from today. And of course, we do note that in the run-up to the budget discussion, there were some test balloons being floated out about the fact that the government needs to raise revenue. And immediately the public seized on the fact that DPM Tharman and perhaps other leaders had earlier said that the government has enough money for the decade. So the public pointed out that, hey, is this a contradiction? And I rather suspect myself that the government is stuck with that announcement. Otherwise, if that announcement had not been made, perhaps we would be debating a GST hike today. So, earlier on, Minister Heng also says that, well, the government has not made a decision on when because it has itself to look at prevailing conditions, economic conditions, and also our needs at the time. Fair enough. Similarly, I don't think we will be in a position to take a stand on that until the information is available at the relevant point in time. So I think it's ridiculous for the government to expect us, as a responsible party, to support something where all the information is still not available and we don't have a crystal ball. And related to that, I should clarify, in case anybody misunderstands, that it is our intention to support the budget when the vote is called. But this should not be mistaken as a support for this announcement of some possible GST hike in a later budget. Should not be mistaken as such. Third clarification, I think Minister touched on why it is not prudent to use land sales as part of government revenue. I mean, this is an issue that we've debated before. But the analogy he gave was, we have 5 parcels of land, and if every few years we sell 1 parcel, there'll be none left. But I think Minister can clarify that it's not quite like that. And land sales actually include many leases which do come back to the government after the tenure of the lease. It's not a case of it being gone forever, or even 10 years for the commercial leases. And finally, perhaps my last clarification is, Minister pointed out about the social mobility insofar as educational attainment of 15-year-olds in the performance of science in the PISA report, to say that our poorer students are doing better than their poorer counterparts in the OECD countries. I filed a PQ on this before. But I think the report also highlights that as far as equity is concerned, our poorer students seem to be further behind our richer students. The gap internally, domestically, compared to the OECD countries. So, isn't it not really comforting for poorer students to tell them that they're doing better than their poorer counterparts in other countries when really in their class they're actually further behind than on average?
Minister.
Well, I thank the member, Mr. William, for your question. First, on your first point about, my reference to Mr. Lau Tia Kiang's point. I think I have something. Actually, when I was listening to him yesterday, I thought I was very happy that, he supported the point that I made about making Singapore a global Asian node of technology, innovation, and enterprise. And that he went on to talk about the various moves that the government made over the years to look ahead and position Singapore to be able to meet new challenges and secure new opportunities, because the world is changing very quickly. So he made a very good speech on our engagement, particularly with China. And I was very surprised that towards the end of that very good speech, he then got distracted by this statement. And let me see what I had. He said, "Sir, the unfortunate thing about this budget is that it is forward-looking too hastily for future revenue stream by prematurely announcing a GST hike. It has become an unnecessary distraction from the vision articulated in this budget. Yeah. And as a real distraction, causing the government to lose its focus on getting buy-in for the vision." Now, this is a real distraction, because in fact, if the Workers' Party truly believes that all the things that you and your members have advocated, spend more on this, spend more on this group, spend more on this others, and that you agree that all this will require new revenue measures, then why don't you just say that, yes, we are very happy to support this, so let's now talk about how we are going to position Singapore for the future. I'll be very happy to discuss this with you. You can file a motion, a separate motion to discuss it. But bear in mind that this is the budget debate. And if we do not talk about a tax increase, we do not debate the tax increase in this very forum, in this very session for the budget debate, then where else are you going to do it? And to suggest that you do it at election rally is just a complete distraction. Right? Do you want to be constructive and say that in any election, we talk about serious things, about how we are going to take Singapore, how we're going to position Singapore for the future, how we're going to create a better life for all Singaporeans, rather than to seize on issues that will make people unhappy and say, oh dear, the government is going to tax you and all that. And therefore, this is a bad move. You must square your position. Do you accept, first and foremost, all that we said, that we do need to spend more? Right? Whether it is preschool, whether it's skills future, whether it is healthcare, whether it is revamping the economy, whether it is security. Do we need to provide for that? And if it is, as I said very clearly in today's debate, in my roundup, I said that even the 2 percentage point increase in GST does not fully cover the expected increase in healthcare expenditure. Is it not right for us to say that we know that there is one item that is going to definitely go up, and we will not even have enough to manage that one item, that we take one measure first and look at how we can meet that? So Mr. Pritam Singh's argument about, I can't support this at this point because, it's so far away, I don't know your revenue pattern, I don't know your spending pattern, and therefore, I don't know what you can do, therefore I'm not going to support it. I don't think it is a rigorous or honest position. It cannot be, right? If you know, as an individual, that you don't have enough money to even pay for your basic meals, should you not provide for some of that? Never mind that I don't know what other things we have to spend on. I mean, that is very simple to understand, and I really don't understand why you want to create this aura that I must know everything before I can decide on anything. I think if I had taken that approach, if previous finance ministers have taken that approach, that I must know every item of expenditure before I can support you, before I know how much to raise, we would have been in serious deficit long, long ago. So I'm very grateful that, previous finance ministers and governments and prime ministers have been extremely prudent in making sure that when we know something is coming, don't avoid it. Don't pretend that it is not coming, and then mislead our people and say that, therefore, without knowing, I cannot support. So the question for me is very simple. Do you support those increased spending? Or are you contradicting all your MPs' position yesterday, where everyone spoke about doing more? And if you do, then tell me, how much is it going to cost? And even to fund a portion of what you have suggested, where is the money going to come from? And would a 2 percentage point increase help us in some ways? Do you disagree with the fact that our healthcare expenditure will go up? And if you don't disagree, then the question is, how do we find the revenue sources to meet that? So that's your answer to your first question. And also your second question about why your party's position about why you cannot support at this point. Yeah. So now that I know that it's your party's position, I'm even more puzzled, because I wonder why all your MPs, every single one of them, spoke about, let's do more. In fact, none of them has suggested that, no, you should cut back on this item or that item. In fact, very good. Whatever you do, double up, do more. So the question is, if I accept all your proposals, I have to redo the expenditure sums again and look at what else we need to do. Yeah. So, yeah. Now, so I think that is quite a distraction. I hope that Mr. Lau was not distracted somewhere. Now, as for your point about the land sales, why my 5-parcel analogy is not the correct one, the basic fact is this. Most of our land sales are of pretty long leases, 99 years for industrial land, some 30, some 60. Now, if you sell that land for 99 years, you're not going to get back that land until 99 years, until 100 years later. So if you're rigorous about it, you really ought to be spending no more than 1% of that land sale proceeds, even if you want to use land sale proceeds, because that's what the land is worth for a year. But for Mr. Pritam Singh to say, oh, don't worry, let's take 20% of the land sales and therefore use that. Isn't it the equivalent? And you are not going to get the land back for the length of the lease. So that stream, that upfront capital payment ought to be considered over its lifespan. And therefore, it is not proper. In fact, several MPs have spoken earlier yesterday that even for building infrastructure, we should be considering life cycle costs. So I think we better do our financing properly. Then on your point about science and the PISA score and the students. Now, we're not saying that we have a perfect education system. In fact, there are many things which I'm very happy that Minister Ng Chee Meng and Mr. Ong Ye Kung are continuing to do, building on the works of previous finance minister, to continue to raise the, sorry? Education minister, sorry. Did I say finance? Oh, okay.
Same person.
I'm not hinting at any changes. I got distracted, yeah. Yeah. Well, they continue to build on this good work that all these changes have taken place for many, many years. And the fact that our students are doing so well, it is really a tribute to our educators, to our parents, many self-help groups. So the numbers which I've shown are done by the OECD study, not just of PISA, but in fact of various areas in which they are looking at our kids, including in areas like collaborative problem solving. I mean, our kids are ranked best in the world in this. So I think we must give credit for this. And as former education minister, I can tell you that the reason why collectively we are ranked so high, the very important reason is this. In every country, you can find one good school, one of the best schools for which the elites will go to. In Singapore, if you look at the performance of students across our schools, you can see what a high average it is. Yeah. Yeah, so when I say every school a good school, it is not just a few good things, because I really think that we must give credit to all our educators, to all our principals, and to all our parents for the hard work that they put in, so that regardless of which school you go to, the child has the best chance of success. And beyond the basic foundation, as they move into post-secondary education, that we have many more pathways for them to excel. So I think it is right and proper that we look at what have been achieved rather than look at what has not been achieved and therefore, pick on that one narrow area and discredit the work that has been going on by so many good people.
Mr. Shanmugam.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir. Can I seek a clarification from Ms. Lim? She said that there was a trial balloon, the Prime Minister spoke last year, and because of the public reaction, the government backed down, but was stuck with this announcement, and therefore this announcement has been made of a future GST increase. Can I invite her to agree that that's a thoroughly hypocritical and dishonest statement, and typical of the statements she makes in this House? Let me explain. Would Ms. Lim agree that Prime Minister first talked about a tax increase during the National Day rally? I think it was in 2013. And that the Finance Minister talked about the tax increase in the budget last year, a year ago. And the Prime Minister, when he spoke about the likelihood of a tax increase late last year, referenced to the Finance Minister's statement earlier in the year. Does she not know all these facts? And if one, with some common sense, puts those facts together with another set of facts, which is that DPM Tharman and the Prime Minister had said the government had enough funds for this term. You put those two sets of government positions together, is it not absolutely clear that A, we don't need money for this term, and B, we will need to raise taxes for the future. Given that the positions have been consistent, and Ms. Lim would also know that, for example, when we first talked about GST, it was mentioned in 1986, but came into force much later, I believe in 2004. 1994. So, given those sets of facts, would Ms. Lim be prepared to withdraw the very serious allegation she makes that this government announces something late last year, trial balloon, public react, we quickly back down, but we are stuck, basically making an accusation that the government is behaving willy-nilly, dishonestly, and if she will not withdraw those baseless suggestions, will she set out what the facts are for making the suggestion, whether she still stands by the suggestion and repeats it? Thank you, sir.
Mr. William.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank the Law Minister for his questions, and I can understand why he wants to accuse me of various things, because he probably was not happy about past debates where I had disagreed with some of his legislative changes, and you know, in typical fashion, he always accuses me of dishonesty when, as far as I'm concerned, I acted honestly. Well, sir, the basis for my statement was that it is my belief that the announcements by the government earlier on that they had enough revenues for this term of government have now tied their hands as to when the GST increase can kick in. And of course, one can look at the principles that our government uses for budgeting, which are usually very conservative. And we've heard the finance minister also talk about the fact that we must be prepared for all contingencies. So if those announcements had not been made, we may be facing a GST increase in this budget statement. Now, as to the chronology of events that the minister recited, I do not have them on hand. I have to go back and check, to be fair to him, but this is my honest belief.
Assuming
Mr.
the
Shan.
facts are as I have set them out, would you agree that the suggestions are baseless, and are you prepared to withdraw that this government behaved dishonestly?
Mr. William.
So I never said that the government behaved dishonestly. I said that the government is stuck with the announcement that they have enough money for the decade.
No. The implication, based on what you've said, is that a trial balloon was floated with the obvious intention that a tax increase was going to be announced now, but because of the public reaction being so severe, the government has backtracked and has changed its mind and has announced it as a future tax increase. Isn't that what you are saying? And if that's not what you're saying, please say so clearly.
So I clearly said that it was my suspicion. I clearly said that. You can check the hands up.
So we
And
are.
it's my honest suspicion.
Yes.
If members
So am I not
can
entitled-
wait till I call them.
Am I not entitled to have a view?
Mr. Shan.
So we now have that confirmation that there was a suspicion. Now, does Ms. Lim agree that it doesn't accord with the standards of a first world parliament and honest debate for someone to come here and start talking about, this is my suspicion, I cannot back it up, it's contrary to all the facts. In fact, I haven't checked the facts. Now that you recount the facts, I'll go back and check, but I have my suspicions. Would she agree that that is contrary to the standards of a first world parliament? And secondly, I'm not the only one to accuse Ms. Lim of dishonesty. I think the phrase, a Latin phrase, will be ringing in her mind. Suppressio veri, suggestio falsi. Somebody very eminent, a high court judge, said that about Ms. Lim. Thank you.
Mr. Willem. Fortunately, we don't have translators for Latin.
Speaker, sir, as far as I know, there's such a thing as parliamentary privilege. And if I recall earlier debates, even PAP MPs were encouraged to come to the House to convey even rumours so that the government has the opportunity to refute them. This is the value of this chamber. And I do not agree with the minister that I'm somehow not up to the standard. And of course, you know, this is what we as MPs have to do to get better clarity on matters of public interest. Of course, the government can rebut our speeches robustly. That's fine. But I don't think I'm disentitled to come to Parliament to advance honestly held beliefs or suspicions.
Within limits. Minister for Finance.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. Now, I want to thank my colleague, Minister Shanmugam, for reminding me that I have not answered this part of Ms. Lim's question. Now, Ms. Lim says that, you are saying this on suspicion. And I believe Ms. Lim is a lawyer and also a police officer before. So, I too have been a police officer before. So we know that the first thing that when we have a suspicion is to go out and interview witnesses as part of our investigation. Now, I want to present myself as your witness because I've been working on this ever since I became finance minister. I want to confirm that the statement made by DPM Tharman that we have enough revenues due this term of government is correct. We have done all our projections, and that is an accurate and truthful statement. In fact, if you were to look at circumstantial evidence, right, why did I not set a timeline for that? And I said that it depends on the prevailing economic conditions. It depends on a number of factors which I will continue to carefully monitor, and that we must not get distracted with one-off events, one-off surpluses. I made that very clear in my statement. And if indeed we were so short, wouldn't it be the logical thing to say, let's do it now and find some ways to do it? We did not. And I said that it's between 2021 to 2025. So I think having told you that I've been working on this ever since I became finance minister to look at all our revenue projections and expenditure projections again and discuss with the Prime Minister and the Deputy Prime Ministers that statement is correct. Right? It is an honest assessment of our position which remains accurate till today. And that is why I did not have to do a GST increase now in this budget. So it was not a case of floating any trial balloon. And if you remember that I said it at the last budget, that we have to look for revenue measures, I said it again at a constituency visit at Cairnhill Moment a few months after that. And then the Prime Minister said it in November last year. So on the basis of all the evidence that I'm offering, would Ms. Lim withdraw your comment?
Mr. Willem.
Sir, I've listened to the Finance Minister's response. I still feel that there's nothing wrong with what I said, but I've noted his answer.
Mr. Speaker, may I seek your consent and the general assent of members present to make a statement before the resumption of the Committee of Supply to consider the estimates of FY 18-19.
I give my consent. Does Leader of the House have the general assent of honourable members present to so move? Leader, please proceed.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that notwithstanding Standing Order number 91, a statement by the Leader of the House and the response to the statement be taken before the resumption of the Committee of Supply to consider the estimates for FY 18-19.
Question is as moved by the Leader of the House. As many of the opinion say aye. The contrary say no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. Leader.
Mr. Speaker, sir, on 1st March, Ms. Sylvia Lim questioned in this House the government's motives in announcing the increase in the goods and services tax some 3 to 7 years before the increase is implemented. She said, and I quote, "We do note that in the run-up to the budget discussion, there were some test balloons being floated out about the fact that the government needs to raise revenue. And immediately the public seized on the fact that DPM Tharman and perhaps other leaders had earlier said that the government has enough money for the decade. So the public pointed out that, hey, you know, is this a contradiction? And I rather suspect myself that the government is stuck with that announcement. Otherwise, you know, if their announcement had not been made, perhaps we would be debating a GST hike today." Unquote. Ms. Lim was suggesting that the government would have raised the GST immediately, if not for the adverse public reaction when it floated the suggestion late last year, and if it had not been stuck with the previous statement that it had enough money for the decade. Sorry, may I repeat that again? Ms. Lim was suggesting that the government would have raised the GST immediately, if not for the adverse public reaction when it floated the suggestion late last year, and if it had not been stuck with the previous statement that it had enough money for the decade. Ms. Lim was in fact accusing the government of being untruthful when it says that it had planned ahead and that its proposal to raise the GST between 2021 and 2025 was the result of such planning. Both the Minister for Finance and the Minister for Law had responded to Ms. Lim to explain that there was no basis for her allegations. The first mention of the need for the tax increase was in the Prime Minister's National Day rally speech in 2013, more than 4 years ago. The Minister for Finance reiterated this in his 2017 budget statement and again at a constituency function a few months later. The Prime Minister spoke again of the likelihood of a tax increase last November and had expressly referred to the Finance Minister's earlier statements. Indeed, in the previous term of government, Deputy Prime Minister Tharman had said during the 2014 budget statement and in the 2015 budget statement that while the government had taken steps to ensure it had sufficient revenue to meet spending needs till the end of this decade, I quote, "we will run into structural deficits if we did not raise revenues in the next decade," unquote. As the Minister for Finance told Ms. Lim in this House last Thursday, what DPM Tharman said in 2014 and 2015 remains true today. The government has enough money to the end of this decade, but beyond that, it will have to raise taxes to meet rising expenditure needs, especially in healthcare. The government never floated test balloons on this matter. It has been deliberate and consistent in all its statements since August 2013. When presented with the facts, Ms. Lim said that her allegations were based on suspicion, not fact. She admitted that she was not certain of the facts herself, but would check on them later. But she did not withdraw her allegations. The next day, on 2nd March, the Minister for Finance issued a statement, setting out the facts again and asking Ms. Lim, now that she had had an opportunity to check the records, if she would withdraw her allegation, as an honourable MP should, and apologize to the House. Ms. Lim has not answered. As the Minister for Finance said in this statement, MPs are entitled to raise suspicions in Parliament if they honestly believe them, but honest belief requires factual basis. And when clear factual replies have been given, an honourable MP should either refute them with further facts or acknowledge them and withdraw their allegations, especially if the allegations had insinuated lack of candour or wrongdoing on the part of the government. With the clarifications that have been given to her by ministers, both in this House and elsewhere, Ms. Lim cannot contend that her suspicion remains reasonable and honestly held. Her allegations have been refuted, the facts she cited have been shown to be inaccurate, and she has not raised any further facts to substantiate her suspicion. In her intervention in Parliament on 1st March, Ms. Lim said, "There is such a thing as parliamentary privilege. However, parliamentary privilege does not entitle MPs to knowingly maintain allegations that have been shown to have no factual basis." Mr. Speaker, sir, I'm speaking to put these facts on the record. Now that Ms. Lim has been apprised of the facts, I request that she withdraws the allegation that the government had floated test balloons on the need to raise revenues within this term and had intended to raise the GST immediately, and apologize to this House before the end of the sitting of Parliament on Thursday, 8 March 2018. Mr. Speaker, I noted that Ms. Sylvia Lim, Honourable Member Sylvia Lim, is not in this House. I will extend a copy of my statement to her. Thank you.
Ms. Sylvia Lim.
Thank you, Speaker. Pursuant to the resolution passed by the House on Tuesday, 6th of March, I wish to make my statement. I had written to Speaker on Monday evening, 5th of March, to inform him that I wish to make a statement in the House concerning the exchanges I had with Ministers Heng Swee Keat and Shanmugam during the budget roundup on the 1st of March. The next morning, on Tuesday, 6th of March, Speaker informed me that the Leader of the House also wished to make a statement on the matter. I was not informed of when she would do so. She subsequently made the statement that same morning at the start of the sitting while I was on my way to Parliament. She has extended a copy of her statement to me by email. Speaker, sir, after the debate on the 1st of March, I've had time to track back what led me to have the impression and suspicions I articulated during the exchanges with the ministers. I would like to share these findings. Since 2013, the Prime Minister had said that our expected increases in spending would require more tax revenue. Finance Minister Heng had also made a similar statement in last year's budget, saying that the government was studying how it would raise revenue through new taxes or raising tax rates. These statements were very general and did not specify any time frame for the raising of taxes. In November 2017, during the PAP convention, Prime Minister Lee announced definitively that the government would be raising taxes as government spending on investments and social services grew. He further stated that Finance Minister Heng was right when he said raising taxes was not a matter of whether, but when. Prime Minister's statement was made on 19th November 2017, with the budget statement for 2018 just 3 months away. Naturally, these announcements concerning tax increases set off public discussion and speculation. 3 days later, on 22nd November 2017, the Ministry of Finance issued a statement that PM Lee's announcement at the PAP convention was in line with a much earlier statement made by DPM Tharman when he was Finance Minister in 2015. DPM Tharman had then said that the revenue measures that the government had already undertaken would provide sufficiently for increased spending planned until the end of the decade. In reporting the MOF statement, Channel News Asia commented as follows, and I quote, "The ministry's statement came after Mr. Lee's comments on the impending tax hike triggered public discussion that the government is making a U-turn," unquote. MOF further stated that planning for the issue now would allow the ministry to, and I quote, "better ease in the needed measures and to give our people and businesses some time to adjust," unquote. The MOF statement did not definitively say that there would be no tax increase in this budget. The fact is, raising taxes in the budget and only announcing it in the budget statement was what the government had done in the past. Hence, the uncertainty over whether taxes, and in particular GST, would be raised this budget continued even after the MOF statement. This was further fueled when MOF office holders kept up the discussion on raising taxes in the immediate run-up to the budget statement, saying they were working on when. Prominent economists went on record to predict that the GST rate would be raised in 2018 or 2019. Such economists included those from UOB, Ernst & Young, and DBS. What is notable is that nowhere in the discussions just before Budget 2018 did the government publicly commit that it would not raise GST before 2021. This was only announced on 19 February during the budget statement. As an opposition MP, it is my duty to watch every move and signal from the government for the future of Singapore and the welfare of Singaporeans. Hence, I admit that I did suspect that the government intended to raise the GST. However, the government contributed to this suspicion by its non-denial of reports and economists' predictions of an immediate GST rise. Based on the sequence of events, I believed the government could have intended to raise the GST at this budget. Thus, during the heat of the exchanges at the budget roundup, I articulated my suspicion. In doing so, I believe I was doing my duty as an MP to convey ground concerns, reactions, and confusion. I did not accuse the government of being untruthful as alleged, and neither had I intended to accuse the government of dishonesty. I do not accept the over-characterization the PAP MPs have put on my words and intentions, based on their own interpretation, born out of overactive imaginations and oversensitivity. Since the government has now refuted that it had any intention to raise GST immediately, I can accept that my suspicion then may not have been correct.
Leader, do you have any response or clarification?
Mr. Speaker, I thank Ms. Sylvia Lim for admitting that she had made a suspicion, although she has said that she has not accused the government of dishonesty. But let me put the facts here. She made the accusation, she made the statement in the House. At that time, she didn't have the facts with her. Minister of Finance put the facts squarely before the House, inviting her to question as a witness. She didn't make any attempt to do that. So here you are, Minister for Finance, together with Prime Minister, with DPM, putting their statements, explaining to the House that their plans had all along been thinking about it in the long run, planning for tax increases for the next decade, and you have an MP coming here to make statements that basically accuses them of doing otherwise. Ms. Lim is saying that the government is saying one thing in public, but planning secretly to do another. So I am disappointed that she has failed to apologize to this House for making these false allegations. The allegations have indeed harmed and tarnished the reputations of other members, namely the Prime Minister, DPM, and Minister of Finance, Heng Swee Keat, because she has put questions, she has not withdrawn allegations, she has not apologized. And I think the privilege that parliamentarians enjoy come with responsibility, that whatever we say here, if you do not have the facts, you should check them, and having checked so, you should consider whether the remarks have indeed hurt the integrity of the members. and I put to the House that indeed they have. So I would like to just remind members of the House that they may not abuse this privilege to misrepresent facts or mislead Parliament. They're not entitled to make unsubstantiated allegations without taking steps to check the fact or knowingly maintain the allegations they have been shown to have no factual basis. Unlike her colleague NCMP Leon Pereira, who both withdrew and apologized to this House for making misleading statements, in a recent case, Ms. Lim has refused to apologize. By so refusing, her conduct falls short of the standard of integrity and honor expected of all members. I must therefore put the honourable member on notice, and the rest of the House too, that if she repeats such dishonourable conduct and abuse parliamentary privilege, I refer the matter to the Committee of Privileges.
Mr. Willem.
Thank you, Speaker, for giving me the opportunity to respond. I'd just like to make 2 points at this stage, depending on where the Speaker wants to take this debate. If the government had indeed been so clear of its intentions not to raise GST before 2021, why is it that the public was so worried that this would happen? Why was it that the economists came up with reports after the PM's speech at the PAP convention to predict that the GST rate would be increased in this budget? Are they all dishonest and hypocritical? Secondly, perhaps we can get some clarification from the leader on the standards expected in this House. And I'd like to quote this statement from Cabinet, which was made in the House quite recently. I begin the quote. If MPs believe that something is wrong, it's MPs' job to pursue the facts and make these allegations in their own name, decide whether something seems to be wrong, and if you think something is wrong, even if you are not fully sure, then come to this House, confront the government, ask for explanations and answers. This is a quote from Prime Minister Lee during the closing debate on 38 Oxley Road. So I'd like the leader to clarify, is there a difference in standard here? One standard when the PM's name needs to be cleared, and another standard when we're talking about raising taxes on the people?
Leader.
In this chamber, we often make representation and bring forth the views from our constituents, from our stakeholders. This is expected of us. We are members of the Parliament. Some of us, most of us, are elected to do so, to be the voice of the people. We are fully expected to do so. There's nothing wrong with it. That's the difference between us. Let me say that again. But we have a responsibility when we bring this matter to this place, because this chamber is for serious debate, is for making of laws, is where we have serious discussions about the future of Singapore. So before we bring the opinions, the speculations, the views, the unhappiness to this chamber, we need to check the facts. Ms. Lim has admitted that she didn't do so in the first instance. But having said so, after she has brought the matter here, we have laid down the facts to her. The Finance Minister has plainly said that there wasn't such an intention. And yet she continued to insist on the allegation. That is the matter that we are discussing here. And this is a difference between what we say in this chamber and what economists, analysts say outside this chamber. We have a duty to fellow members, we have a duty to fellow Singaporeans that whatever we say here carry responsibility. And this also is the standard that Prime Minister has said earlier.
Mr. Willem.
So I think it's clear where we stand, and I'd just like to make it plain what my position is. I do not see any reason for me to retract the statements which I made during the exchanges with the ministers. As I mentioned in my earlier statement, there was a sequence of events which led me to have that suspicion, contributed to by the government. And secondly, sir, I will not apologize to this House because I believe that I was doing my duty as an MP in the constitutional role that we have been elected into to give the government the forum to account to the people. And for that, I make no apology.
I duly note, Leader. Anything else?
I'd just like a clarification. Does Ms. Lim not retract her allegation?
I believe
I
she's
thought I
been quite
made it
clear on
very
that.
that I'm not retracting.
So I misunderstood earlier. I thought that Ms. Lim has admitted that those were her suspicion and that she would retract it. But that being the case, I must say that we're deeply disappointed. For someone of her experience should accuse the government of lack of candor, even though the facts have been explained to her clearly, both in the public domain, in statements made by MOF, as well as here by Minister of Finance. I would like to say that her conduct falls well short of the standards of integrity and honourable conduct we expect of all members. And regrettably, to say that it reflects the low standards which the member and her party have set for themselves with regard to commitment to truthful and honest debate in Parliament. Which I should repeat again, it is expected of us to bring our views forth here. It's expected of us to debate. But if the facts were wrong, and we have said that the facts were wrong, we had not had this plan of floating a balloons and then only to retract after public pressure, that's just plainly not existent. It's a figment of imagination. Should continue with this accusation, just like this deeply disappointing and deplorable.
I've permitted both sides of the House to state their respective positions. Minister for Finance, would you like to add?
Mr. Speaker, sir, thank you for allowing me to take up this matter. Now, I think, Ms. Lim, you made a statement on the 1st of March, and let me quote, "We do know that in the run-up to the budget discussion, there were some test balloons being floated out about the fact that the government needs to raise revenue. And immediately, the public seized on the fact that DPM Tharman and perhaps other leaders had earlier said that the government has enough money for the decade. So the public pointed out that, hey, you know, is this a contradiction? And I rather suspect, I meaning Ms. Sylvia Lim, that the government is stuck with the announcement. Otherwise, you know, if their announcement had not been made, perhaps we will be debating a GST hike today," unquote. Now, I think what Ms. Lim meant by that statement is that she was suggesting that the government would have raised GST immediately, if not for the adverse public reactions when it floated the suggestion late last year, and if it had not been stuck with a previous statement that it had enough money for the decade. Now, Ms. Lim was in fact accusing the government of being untruthful when it says that it had planned ahead and that its proposal to save the GST, to raise the GST between 2021 and 2025 was the result of such planning. Now, Ms. Lim asked earlier that why is it that the Ministry of Finance did not come out to review details of the budget. Now, the budget is a serious matter. We take great care in preparing the budget, and that the details are kept as secret, until the day of the budget, because it has got impact on the market and on not just in Singapore but internationally. So I do think that these are serious matters. Now, what Ms. Lim is saying, that your allegations, you made an allegation, you claim to reflect these views of the public, but you said, I suspect that this is the case. Now, Parliament is a serious forum for us to discuss serious matter. Now that you have opportunity to gather all the facts, now that I and my colleagues have made all the clarifications, and you had the chance over the last few days since you made the statement to check the Hansard, to check whatever facts, I think it is only right and honorable that you withdraw the statement, unless you have a basis for that, that you cannot come here and say, I heard this, I'm repeating this. You need to have a basis. So having examine all the facts, do you have a basis? And if not, I think it is only right and proper that you withdraw the statement.
Ms. Lim.
Thank you, Speaker. I don't think Minister for Finance was listening to my speech. I set out in my speech the basis for my suspicions, going through a chronology of events that led me, and not only me, others to have that suspicion. Now, Minister for Finance mentioned that, of course, budget preparation is a secret and so on, and I think that's actually part of the whole issue. Only the Cabinet knows the truth. And as I said in my speech earlier, the government has said it's refuted that it had any intention to raise the GST this year. I do not know the truth, so I can accept that I may have been wrong. But I do not accept that my suspicion had no basis, and I do not apologize.
Mr. Loh Teck Kiang.
Thank you, sir. I do take it that budget is a serious matter, and it's always secrecy because it might affect market movement and all that. But I'm sure the government has no intention to raise GST. I think there's nothing wrong for the government to come up earlier to say that, look, we don't have intention to raise GST at this budget. And that will have cleared the air and the confusion on the ground of speculation that, well, you're keeping quiet, you're taking raising tax, but not mentioning what kind of tax. And GST is a form of tax. And that, I think, contributed to ground confusion and leading to the impression form. And I can understand at the heat of exchange that it comes to your mind, you articulated it, and I think Ms. Ling accepted that, that was at the point in time, and now, it's clear that the government has no intention to raise GST at the point in time, and her suspicion wasn't really correct at the point in time.
I duly note the position stated by both sides of the House. Unless there are any other points to be raised by either side, they'll provide further clarity. Minister for Finance.
I think I can accept that in the heat of exchange, you have, you may be saying things which you did not intend, but now, having had so many days to examine the facts, I would like to know that whether, Ms. Lim, do you have a basis for your belief, and now do you accept the explanations that have been given, that this has been the intention of the government, there was no backtracking, that this was the facts as we have put out. In fact, the issue of raising taxes have been raised many times before that. It's just that the timing and the details are not reviewed. And I don't think it is proper for us to talk about the details and timing of it way in advance of a budget.
Ms. Lim.
So I have nothing substantive to add to what I've already said. I said in my speech earlier that I can accept that my suspicion may have been wrong, but I do not accept that my suspicion had no basis, and I do not accept that I have failed or been derelict in my duty as an MP to this House.
As I've said earlier, I duly note the position stated by both sides of the House. I propose that we move on. Order. The clerk will now proceed to read the orders of the day.